Hello, welcome to the MuseScore Café for today, Wednesday, February 6th, 2019. And last week I was coming to you from Brussels, where I was for the FOSDEM convention and got to meet a bunch of the other MuseScore developers, which was a fantastic experience. And I'd like to say hi to any of you guys who might be tuning in. Um, and now I'm back home in Denver, and the whole idea of going on a trip, going away, and coming home, and realizing that it's been a few weeks since I talked about music, I want to talk about music today, and in particular, the idea of going away and coming home. This is an analogy I use a lot when I teach about music. So I actually don't have a ton of time today. I've got some other things I need to attend to. Um, I'm just, as usual, checking to make sure that things are working. Yep, they are. Okay. The analogy that I like to use when I talk about going away and coming home has to do with harmony. And so that's really a topic that's very close to me and something I work on a lot in my music and my teaching. And I've sort of developed some ways of thinking about harmony based on the way it's been, dealt with for hundreds of years, but maybe putting my own spin on it. So I'm going to give you like a little overview of what this might look like. And, eventually I'm going to get much more into depth into some of these topics. I plan to develop some new courses to teach this material, but I want to give you a little taste of it because I've alluded to this before and used some of this language. So, as always, anyone who's tuned in live, feel free to just use the chat to ask questions and or make comments of any kind, whether they're related to the topic or not. And I'm happy to just chat. But right now, I just want to lay some things out. So. I'm going to use some of the language of traditional European harmony, like you would learn in a classical music theory course, a college course, or a high school AP music theory course. I'm also going to use some of the language of jazz harmony, the way that jazz musicians tend to think about chord progressions, and I'm going to use a little bit of kind of my own unique language. So one of the things that I want to talk about is this classical concept that we talk about chords having a function of tonic, dominant, and subdominant. And this is very useful terminology. We say the tonic chords are the ones that feel like home, the one chord. In the key of C, it's the C chord. So here's my C chord. Let me play it. That's our one chord. And so that's our one chord at the beginning. Typically, you might see it at the beginning and end of a piece. So other chords that have tonic function are ones that have some of the same notes in them. And it's possible to get really detailed about how this all works, and I've developed certain ways of talking about that. But the way I would say it is the 6 chord, the 1 chord, and the 3 chord are the ones that are usually said to have tonic function. Basically, it's all about this note here. It's about this note here, the E. The notes that have that chord, the chords that have that note are the ones that have tonic function. And if you want me to get a little more specific, I'll tell you it's about the half steps. The C major scale, which I'll write out really quick in eighth notes. So the C major scale has half steps between E and F and B and C. This half step is like coming home. It's coming from somewhere else, coming home. This half step is the going away from home. That's the way I like to describe it anyhow. So if E is part of my home, because it's part of my tonic chord, my one chord, C, E, G, this motion from E to F is like the ultimate in going away from home. And this motion, the one from B to C, is the ultimate in coming back home. So, which also happens to be the title of a piece that's of mine that I think is probably featured in a screenshot on the website, on the MuseScore website somewhere, but not. I didn't name it after this concept. So we have this chord, the one chord, which I say is our tonic chord, and then we need to go somewhere else and come back. Well, one of the places that we like to go is this dominant chord. The dominant chord, the 5 chord, is the one that has that B in it, and I'm going to enter that chord. And actually, I'll do that, and I'll enter, make it a 7th chord, and I'll come down here, and I will enter here we go. This isn't necessarily the world's best voice leading, but that's okay. I'm not worrying about that too much right now. So if I play this progression, so what's going on? I have two Fs. That's why it's so lousy. Let's go do that, and now I'm happier. Some people would tell you this F here should come back down to an E, and I'd be better off putting this F here and juggling the voices around. But I'm not talking about voice leading so much. But I am talking about that motion from B to C. That is one of the things that makes this 5-to-1 so powerful. So this motion here from 5-to-1 in classical harmony is called the authentic cadence, and it's the thing that you will hear at the end of almost any piece, and really at the end of every section of every piece, and this remains true in jazz and popular music also. It is the fundamental chord progression that we see in tonal music. But the other chord, so this is the dominant chord, and we talk about chords having dominant function. The other chord that's said to have dominant function is the one we would get if we just removed the G from the equation. And then we have what's left is a diminished chord. So we just have the upper part of that G, and this is actually a dominant 7th chord. I should write it that way. Oh, by the way, notice the font I'm using. I did install for myself this it's called Sicilian numerals, and I like it for Roman numeral analysis because it lets me do little numbers and superscripting and things like that. So I'm going to post this on my website and post a link. I mentioned this in my MuseScore education webinar last week or a couple weeks ago, and I just haven't gotten around to posting it yet, in part because I've been traveling and just haven't, well, not in part, totally because I've been traveling and just have been too busy to deal with it. And I want to attempt to contact the developer of it. But I can also make that be a superscripted 7 by pressing Shift 7, and then I get a superscripted 7. So that's what this chord was, at least when it had the G in it also. Okay, so I have my 5-7 chord here. So the dominant chords are the 5 chord and the chord that I would get if I took the G out of the equation. So if I take the G out of the equation, I have B, D, F. This is the diminished 7 chord, and that chord is also considered to have dominant function. And one of the hallmarks of dominant function is it's considered very unstable. It has nothing else it wants to do but go to 1. Once you've hit the 5 chord, it's like all over. It's all over but the resolution 1. We know exactly what's coming. The 1 chord is coming next. Now there's what's called a deceptive resolution where you go somewhere other than 1, but we have created a very clear expectation. That's where it's going next. So that's what the dominant chord does. The subdominant chords are the other chords that are left, and these are going to be the ones that have an F in them as part of their basic triad and don't have this leading tone. This B is the one that makes this so unstable, wanting to come to C. But the other chords, it's the 2 chord and the 4 chord, which you'll say I've used here. The 2 chord and the 4 chord are the ones that have this scale degree 4, and that motion from E to F is what makes it feel like you've gone somewhere else. You've traveled away from home and you're visiting. So again, this might seem really ridiculously corny, but the spending a week in Brussels, it became like a little home away from home, and we stayed in a lovely villa there, and that was like the temporary place of rest. That's the term that's often used in classical discussions of what subdominant function might mean. By the way, let me switch to the camera here, make sure you can see. Yes, there we go. While we were there, the developers, we all got to get these lovely MuseScore hoodies that at some point someone should make available. Anyhow, it was just a wonderful bonding experience. It was like a little home away from home, and but now I'm back at my home. So there's the home away from home, and then there's your actual home. So the home away from home might be this 4 chord. So I'm just going to copy this 4 chord and put it in here. And so you can hear what it sounds like to go to this home away and then come back. So that's that sound. So starting from the beginning, you'll hear 1 to 5 to 1, and then 4 and back to 1. Okay, so in these cases, I used the 4 chord and the 5 chord in these kind of weak positions. So if we think of harmony as having like places of rest and then places of motion, really the places of rest here are really the 1 chords that occur in measure 1 and measure 3. This is like the breathing out, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. And so this 4 chord, yes, I call it a temporary place of rest, but it happened on the road, if it were, in this weak position. It also could have been on beat 3. If I wanted to come back to beat 1, if I wanted to come back to a C chord here, I might use the 4 chord in the middle of the measure and then come back. But sometimes we really land more solidly on a 4 chord. And now we want to create more of a sense of journey to that 4 chord. And in tonal music, the way we create, the most powerful way that we have to create motion towards any other chord is to give him his own dominant. So here we have our 1 chord, and then we gave him a dominant chord, the 5 chord in the key of C. Well, if I want to feel like I've really journeyed to this 4 chord and really arrived and really make this 4 chord feel like we've arrived somewhere, then instead of just having the 1 chord here, I'm going to just repeat it for now with the R command. I suppose I should install my thing. This isn't so much about a MuseScore demo, but it's still useful. So I am going to go ahead and just put in my little utility to show you my keystroke so you can see what I'm doing. Okay. So if I play this, we'll have a 1 chord. And then we go to the 4 chord. So if I really want to make this more powerful, I want to give this 4 chord his own personal dominant. So I want to ask myself, in the key of F, in the key of the 4 chord, what would the 5 chord be? Well, the answer is in the key of F, F, I can't sing, F, G, A, B flat, C. C is the 5 chord. I want to give him his own 5 chord, that's a C chord. Well, I already have a C chord, but this C chord is the 1 chord where I was. It doesn't feel 5y. It doesn't feel very dominant-y. In order to make it feel that way, I need that 7th to really tell the story. So what I'm going to do is change this G here. I don't really need the 5th so much. I'm going to make it be that. So I'm going to use now the jazz way of labeling this chord. I'm just going to call it the 1 chord as a dominant 7th. If I wanted to label it the more classical way, I can do both. Let me go back. I'm going to go to the next lyric and call it 5, 7. Oops, 5, 7. That's because this is okay, so I've got that Sicilian numerals font as the default font, but only for odd lyric lines, not for even lyric lines. But I'll fix that in a second. So we say 5, 7, that's a 7, it's shift 7. We'll see it for real in a second. Of, and we use slash to mean of, 4. So this notation, 5, 7 of 4, is how we would notate it. Now let me go back to the inspector and actually set my even lyric lines to use Sicilian numerals also. Sicilian numerals set as style. There we go. So now we get to see the 5, 7 of 4, and we see that this font does not do a great job of spacing that shifted 7. So I'm I guess control space. Yeah, that's not pretty either. Well, we're going to live with that for now. So anyhow, this is 5, 7 of 4, which would be the way a classical theory text would generally label it. And then, now that we're on the 5 chord, we could either just stay. I mean, now that we're on the 4 chord, we could either just stay on the 4 chord and come to 1, or we could have a 5 chord and then come to 1. Let me go ahead and just let you hear what it sounds like to travel to the 4 chord like this. See, now it sounds like we've actually landed on that 4 chord. That dominant 7th makes all the difference. So we've created this half-step motion from the B flat to the A. And that's like really powerful in outlining harmony. And now if I want to come back to 1 again, I can just put in my 5 chord. And again, voice leading wise, this may or may not be ideal, but I think I set it up so that it's not too terrible. Now let's hear it. And now we're back to 1. So we can, once we've reached the 4 chord, we can just use the 5 chord to come back home again. But the other thing that we can do is, I'm going to come back because I want to show you this other, I want to fill in this measure first, then I want to talk about what else I can do here. No, I'm going to talk about this first, sorry. There's another thing that we like to do, and it's called borrowing from the parallel minor. This piece is in C major. And major keys are nice, they're beautiful and wonderful, and we like major keys, but minor keys have a lot of really interesting color. And if you think about it, the difference between C major and C minor, I'm going to enter a C minor scale. We already saw the C major scale. E flat and A flat, B flat, and C. At least in the key of C minor, we would see these accidentals. Yes, we know harmonic minor exists. We might raise this B flat. And we will, because the 5 chord, we want the 5 chord, even a minor key, to have that B natural. And that's why making this a B natural is called the harmonic minor, because it really gives us the harmony that we want. It gives us our dominant 7th 5 chord that we want so badly. So minor keys like to borrow this B natural from major keys. But major keys love to borrow this A flat, the flatted 6th scale degree. Major keys love to borrow this note. They also borrow these 2 other notes, but this is really a huge key important note that major keys love to borrow that note. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to put in F and then A flat. And then I'll come up here and enter the rest of my chord, F and C. Now let's listen to what this sounds like. We're going from the major 4 chord to a minor 4 chord. And I'm going to play it starting from here. There you go. So this sound of the major 4 chord, then instead of coming directly back to 1, and by the way, this sound here, let me come back here, 4 going to 1. That's called a plagal cadence. I mentioned that this 5 to 1 is called an authentic cadence. 4 to 1 is called a plagal cadence, and it's most famous as being the amen at the end of a hymn. That's how it's always taught. Amen. This is like the fancy amen that you get at the end of a hymn, like at Easter church service or something. Amen. So this goes back hundreds of years also. 4 going to minor 4 coming back to 1. You'll find examples of this going back to the Baroque and earlier. So the 4 chord going to a minor 4 chord, borrowing that little bit of minor 4 sound is really powerful. And jazz uses this sound all the time, as does classical music. So that is another way of coming back home from 4 to 1, doing it by way of the minor 4. So the other thing that I would want to show you then is coming from 2. How are we going to set up 2? How are we going to make 2 sound interesting? And the way we're going to make 2 sound interesting, or sound like we've arrived on this 2 chord. 2 chord is, again, just a subdominant chord. It's got that key note in it. It's got that F in it. It has that note that says you're not home anymore. You don't have an E. You have an F. You have the note that E went to. You have this other place, this home away from home. So this 2 chord has that F in it. If I want to really, in the same way I did here, giving the 4 chord his own personal dominant, if I want to do the same to the 2, I want to give him his own personal dominant chord. Oh, by the way, I made this a 2-7 chord, so I might as well enter that 7 there. Did I enter that? I think I entered 2-7-4. There we go. Here we go. 1 1 1 7 1 is what I entered instead of 1 1 7. Okay. I want to give this 2 chord his own personal dominant. So now I got to ask myself, what's the dominant in the key of D? D, D, E, F, G, A. A is my 5. So I want to enter an A dominant 7th chord. So I'm going to do that here. I'm going to enter an A, and I'm going to make at least some effort to make this thing voice lead reasonably. So this now is an A7 chord, and what have I left out? I've chosen to make it a dominant 7th chord, and so I haven't doubled anything. A, C sharp, E, G, but not in that order. So I'm going to label this again in the jazz way. We would just call that, since A is the 6th scale degree, we typically just enter a capital 6, 7. But in the classical world, it's more common to call it 5, 7, and then I need that space of 2. So that's more the classical way of notating that chord. Let's listen to what this sounds like as a way of getting to 2. So I made this 2 chord be a 7th chord. Probably for this demonstration it would be more satisfactory. Oops, so that little 7 is just confusing me, but I should zoom in a little bit because I really just want to delete the 7. There we go. I'm going to make this C be a D so I can really just have a triads, because I hear the C sharp really wanting to go up to that D voice leading wise, and that was bugging me. So that is this motion into the 2 chord. It's like 5 to 1, but in the key of D minor now. And again, I made this a dominant 7th chord with a C sharp so that I could get a dominant 7th 5 chord. The key of D minor doesn't have that. If you think about a D minor scale, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C natural, D. It has a C natural, but we raise that 7th scale degree to C sharp to give us that 5 chord, to give us that major or dominant 7th 5 chord. So again, we do it to improve the harmony, which is why that scale, D, E, F, G, B flat, A, B flat, C sharp, D, is called the harmonic minor because it's got better harmonies in it. So this progression gets me to that D minor. And then again, I need to come home, so I will probably now do it by way of the 5 chord, and I especially like that because it gives me the circle of fifths. Music loves the circle of fifths. 5 to 1 is going down a fifth. That is the most powerful motion, which is why this motion here from is also that 5 to 1 in the key of 4, or 5 to 1 in the key of 2. This going down a fifth motion is so powerful. We love it. Our ears love it. So going down a fifth from D to G, from 2 to 5, then gives us that powerful circle of fifth that then we continue with another down a fifth from 5 to 1. That progression 2, 5, 1 is like the fundamental chord progression in jazz. So I'm going to enter this chord progression now, and I think I'm going to do it. I'm just thinking a little bit about voice leading. Here we go. This voice leading makes me just happy enough. So here's the 2, 5, 1. Whoops, that's not what I meant at all. So I'm looking at that. I don't want to hear it because it's just wrong. I want this to be the D, this to be the F. There, now I'm happier. Okay, so now I have my chord progression leading to the D, leading to the D, and then leading back to 1. And I'm singing these half steps because these are the most powerful melodic lines. The C sharp to the D and the F to the E. So this, in a nutshell now, is the fundamental basis of tonal harmony. We have motion from one that kind of marks time and comes back to one, marks time in a different way. This is going to the 5 chord coming back to one. This is the 4 chord coming back to one. Now we're getting a little more adventurous. We're venturing to the 4 chord and then taking an interesting route back to one. Now we're journeying to the 2 chord and taking a nice journey back to one, and this time taking like the really expected journey back to one. So this chord progression sums up just a ton of Western harmony, tonal music, whether it's Baroque music, whether it's Romantic era music, whether it's jazz, whether it's popular music. What we're looking at right here is really just the nuts and bolts of Western harmony, kind of summarized in terms of journeys between home, which is our 1 chord, and somewhere else. And our somewhere else's are 2s and 4s, our subdominant chords. And we're using our dominant chord as a way of getting back home. And, we can use 4 for that also. 4 can either be in motion or it can be this temporary place of rest. And then 2 can also be this temporary place of rest. And then we borrow that little bit of the minor key because we like that sound. As I said, this in a nutshell is like, I would have to do a study to tell you for sure, but, maybe 80% of harmony could probably be summarized in what I have just showed you here. So let me just play this whole chord progression right here. And there you have it. So what we've done here is we've journeyed back and forth from 1 to 1 by way of the 5 chord, and then from 1 to 1 again by way of the 4 chord. Then we decided to get a little more adventurous and take a journey to the 4 chord, and then come back home to 1. And then we decided to get a little more adventurous and take a journey to the 2 chord, and then again come back home to 1. I'm not saying that everything does it in this order. You might have some songs that start right off with a journey to 4 and then coming back home, and then they might stay around 1 for a little while. Then they might journey to the 2 and then come back. They might journey to other places. There might be 6 chords, there might be 3 chords. I'm not saying that these are the only chords involved, but if you really abstract away a lot of the other details, this, instead of coming back to a 1 chord here, I could have made this a 3 chord. Let me just do that really quick. If I change that to this and change this to that, I'll have a 3 chord. So let's hear that now. So very bad parallel fifths from here, here, and here to here. So we wouldn't actually voice lead it this way in a classical music theory class. That's considered taboo. But whatever. I can solve that just by a different doubling if I really want. I can make that be a G. So this idea that maybe instead of always coming back to 1, we might use a substitute for 1, like 3, or use 6 as a substitute for 1, or just journey to the 6 and say, well, you know what, we're going to take a journey to the 6 and then give him his own second. Oh, these are called secondary dominants. When you give a chord his own dominant, his own 5 chord, that's called a secondary dominant. This minor 4 chord that we borrowed from the key of C minor, that is called a borrowed chord. So secondary dominants and borrowed chords, by far the most important chords there are to know in Western harmony. There's things with diminished chords, there's things with what are called augmented 6th chords, and 1 or 2 other like much less important chords that you might come across. But let me actually just set this back. I like undo, so I'm just going to keep undoing all this changes until I get back where I started. There we go. And let me save this now. So this is my little outline of what, I don't know, what harmony can look like. It's not the only way of arranging a chord progression, but it's a very common way of doing things, moving from one, journeying, kind of just staying close to home, and then deciding to take a journey somewhere else, and then coming back home, take a journey somewhere else, come back home. And the ways that I did it, using secondary dominants to get somewhere else, coming back home by way of either the 5 or this borrowed minor 4 chord. It's just, again, you can use these as building blocks to make all sorts of different chord progressions in classical music, in jazz and popular music, and really, all forms of Western music. Folk musics are all based on these same exact sounds. So that is really what I wanted to be talking about here. And just wanted to make sure there weren't questions. I was looking at my phone, and I see there's some people watching, and hopefully you're enjoying what you're hearing. Um, so again, I wanted to talk about this. It just came to mind because I did just take this journey to Brussels, and then it felt like a little home away from home, and then journeyed back home, and it brought to mind this metaphor that I often use, and I just knew that I hadn't talked about music for a few weeks. I've been talking about software or talking about new features in the program, but not about music, and wanted to talk about music. Plus, I know that as soon as I tie up all the loose ends that I've been away for the last I've been away from home more than I've been home for the last couple months now, traveling. Once I'm all settled back in, the next order of business for me, after I update my course, and I do want to put in my usual plug for my course. So the online course, well, the link's on the thing. You don't need me to take you there. But yeah, I have an online course to teach you to use MuseScore, and it's I think quite good. And that's my commercial right there. So the course for using MuseScore here is it's very detailed, has a lot of stuff in it, and I will be updating it. I've already added some things from MuseScore 3 to explain about MuseScore 3, but I want to update really the whole course. And when I'm done with that, I want to be developing new courses then to teach music theory, to teach some of this material, but I go much more into depth, talking about ways of borrowing this minor key tonality here. For instance, now to say borrowing, we're in the key of F here. This is like 5-1 in the key of F, but maybe, remember I said this was all about this note, A flat, scale degree, flat 6? Well, what if in the key of F I borrow scale degree, flat 6? F, G, A, B flat, C, D is the 6, D flat is flat 6. D flat, I'm probably singing the wrong notes. Okay. F, G, A, B flat, C, D is the 6, D flat is the flat 6. Borrowing this note, and on the 5 chord is also a really powerful thing. Now we're getting very specifically into what you might think of as a jazz sound. This chord here, D, is the flat 9. This is the foundation of so much jazz harmony, adding these color tones in here. But it's not unique to jazz. Bach loved this note too. I mean, he might have left out the C and then had just the rest of the stack above it, creating a diminished chord, but it's really the sound of that D flat borrowed from the key of F minor that Bach was reaching for there. So that Bach was all about that note. And so yeah, I would be when I develop a course on harmony, I'm going to go much deeper into that, talk about how to borrow those notes, talk about how the fact that D flat there and this C sharp here end up being the same note, and that if I add that same note here, the flat 9 here, that's B flat, and that's going to be the same as this B flat. So there's a lot of similarities between this motion and that motion, which has a lot of ramifications to ear training, and there's other chords that we can build, that we can borrow here. There's so much more depth we can get into, diminished chords and so forth. So I'm really looking forward to developing an online course to really just teach you all these things about harmony that can really enrich your harmonic language when you're writing music, when you're arranging music. And that's really something I'm looking forward to developing some new teaching materials for. So I hope you've enjoyed this session, and I've enjoyed presenting it. I, again, had a great time at FOSDEM, great time meeting all the other MuseScore developers, or so many of them anyhow. It was a wonderful experience, and I'm really excited by all the things that are going on with MuseScore, and the new developments and the new people that are doing such a great job. And everything's I'm just really happy with how things are going and by the possibilities that I'm seeing, and I'm really looking forward to what I'm going to be bringing forth to you guys over the next few months and what MuseScore is going to be bringing forth. So I think I will sign off. As I mentioned, I have some other things to attend to, and I hope you found this useful, and hopefully it whets your appetite for future courses. And if you're interested, make sure you just drop me a line, send me an email, let me know you're interested. I'll probably open the course for pre-registration so that people can get in line, so to speak, and make sure that you're notified when the course becomes available. But yeah, I'm very serious about developing this. So thanks a lot, and I will be back next week talking to you about some other topic that I'm not sure what it'll be. It'll probably be how to use some particular feature of MuseScore. So if there's a particular feature of MuseScore you'd like me to talk about, feel free to drop me a comment about that. All right, thanks again so much, and I will see you next week.